Good evening or good morning, wherever you are in the world. I'm Regina Yao, the founder and president of the Pixel Project, and I'm moderating the third Giving the Devil His Due audiobook panel in a series of live stream panel sessions with audiobook narrators, authors, producers, and editors held as part of the launch of the audiobook edition of our charity anthology, the Shirley Jackson Award nominated Giving the Devil His Due. And this panel is also part of the Pixel Project's activities um, for the upcoming 16 days of activism against gender-based violence, which will be kicking off on the 25th of November with International Day of the Elimination of Violence Against Women. So this charity anthology is part of our Read for Pixels program, through which we work with award-winning best-selling authors to raise awareness and funds for our work to end violence against women and girls. It was initially launched in paperback and ebook editions from our publishing partner, Running Wild Press, on the 1st of September 2021. Now, just over a year later, we are absolutely thrilled to release the audiobook edition, which was produced in partnership with VoiceWorks Audio and many of the finest audiobook narrators in the business. So today's YouTube session is also our 13th Read for Pixels live stream author panel. And the Pixel Project created these panels to be accessible resources for writers interested in approaching themes such as misogyny, sexism, gender, and violence against women with depth, empathy, and accuracy in their stories. And what better topic than bringing the devil to life, the power of audiobooks to unmask abusive men. So here to participate in this discussion are two of the key people who are an invaluable part of our anthology. So next to me is Errick Nunnally, and Errick was raised in Boston, served in the USMC, graduated from art school, and studied Krav Maga. He has published 3 novels, Blood for the Sun, All the Dead Men, and Lightning Wears a Red Cape, and several stories in anthologies and magazines. Visit erricknunnally.us to learn more about his work. And he wrote the original story Devil's Hollow for our anthology, which we'll be discussing today. And Robin Miles is a producer, director, and actor. So Robin's right below Errick and I. It's we did not choose this configuration. StreamYard did. I'm just going to say this one
I just got here first.
So Robin is a producer, director, and actor with over 25 years of experience in theater and audio performance. She has garnered the industry's top honors, including the Audi Awards for Best Solo Performance and multiple genres, PW and Audiophile Voice of the Year Awards, Audiophile's Golden Voice, a Grammy finalist as well, an Audible Hall of Fame, and the Earphone Awards. She attended Yale University and the Yale School of Drama and the British American Drama Academy at Oxford. She teaches speech and acting at Pace University and owns Voxpertise, an NYC production and training studio. She narrated Devil's Hollow by Errick Nunnally and Sweet Justice by Kanisha Williams for the audiobook of the anthology. Now, you, the audience, will also be able to ask them questions live. Just make sure you're logged into your YouTube account so that you can type your questions into the chat box to the right of the YouTube screen. And Juliana, who is today's producer and chat box moderator, will relay them to me to read out to the panel to answer. And for those of you who are interested in getting your very own copy of Giving the Devil His Due, you can order the audiobook, the ebook, or the paperback from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Apple Books, and more. All net proceeds go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. And now, before we begin the panel discussion, Robin has very, very graciously agreed to read a short excerpt from Devil's Hollow to get us started. Over to you, Robin.
Thank you. It's the beginning of the book, so I'm going to read it with the title. Devil's Hollow by Errick Nunnally. Mike held his son's shoulder, looked around the campus, and said, "So much better than a state college." He poked his son in the chest. "A man's got to get out and take a few shots to the balls to learn a few things. Dad! Mike grinned at his wife and surprised Davy with a light slap in the crotch. Carla cringed, but only inside. Outside, she maintained a stoic facade and made no comment. There were actions she could take, however, small things she could do to break the momentum without drawing her husband's ire. She stepped between the two and hugged her son, congratulating him on his first day and wishing him well. She held his face and blocked her son's embarrassed eyes from his father. "We have a flight to catch. You two should say your goodbyes," she said, wiping at the corner of her eye. Mike thrust his hand out for a shake. "Don't forget, my boy, you're here because of my hard-earned dollars. I never took it easy on you because I knew you could make something of yourself, just like your old man. Make me proud." Despite going soft around the middle, Mike was still a strong, imposing man, a successful salesman forever eyeing a dealership of his own. Davy's jaw muscles rippled as his father grasped his hand and squeezed. He preferred David, but his father insisted on infantilizing his name. He treated his son like a smaller version of himself, an offshoot, a product. David was at college on a full athletic scholarship, the same as his father, but he wasn't planning on becoming his father. Football was the old man's preferred sport, and David had chosen lacrosse. His father understood how rough the game was and begrudgingly accepted it. Carla watched as her son leaned in to meet his father's hand. David had learned long before to meet his father's handshake aggressively, to thrust his hand forward so that their palms met at the crook of thumb and pointer. If he failed at the move, it meant getting his knuckles ground together. He was nearly as tall as his father, and entering the physical prime of his life. Carla knew that David squeezed back just as hard. Mike released his grip and slapped his son's shoulder. Carla waved, a sad smile on her face. On the way back to their rental car, Mike massaged his fingers. Carla maintained the silence, encouraging her husband's reverie. Mike ordered whiskey and sodas on the plane until the attendant gently deflected his requests. "Do I seem drunk at all to you?" The flight attendant, a young woman half Mike's size, smiled and said, "Not at all, sir. It's our policy to limit drink service for everyone." "Bulldung," Mike barked, a sly grin on his face. He winked at the attendant. Carla sat in the middle seat, studiously avoiding involvement. When the attendant met her eyes, Carla offered a weak smile. "I can show you our policy if you like, sir." The airline worker exuded good humor and professionalism. Mike held his hands up in surrender and leaned on his charm. Okay, I know when I'm beat. How about just a club soda for me then?" He did that with women mostly, a sort of reverse play when he came on strong, then caved easily. It worked on Carla, worked until she'd said yes to the ring, until she got pregnant, even when the drinking increased. Carla felt a strong nudge. Mike nodded in the attendant's direction. The name tag on her lapel said Rachel. "Anything for you, miss?" "Oh, no, I'm fine, thank you." The attendant nodded and turned to leave. "No, wait," Carla said. "I'll have a cola, whichever brand is fine." "Yes, ma'am." "No, I'm sorry," Mike said. "Geez, make up your fucking mind, Carla." Carla stared at the back of the seat in front of her and said, "Water, please." "You're making this lady's job way harder than it needs to be. All she's got to do is bring you a drink." Mike grinned at Rachel. "It's not a 1,000-piece puzzle. I mean, if you're thirsty, you should know what you want to drink." "Actually," Rachel interjected, You wouldn't believe the training we have to do in order to bring drinks. Oh, Mike said. Do tell. He leaned forward a bit, the better to beam into Rachel's face. Rachel briefly met Carla's eyes, and a jolt of emotion passed between them. Carla felt a sudden sense of safety and calm. The attendant launched into a brief of technical requirements, medical training, safety regulations, and more. Mike forgot about his wife, pleased to have Rachel's full attention. And that was the flight. When they deplaned, the attendant stopped Carla and handed her a folded piece of paper. That book on Italy I mentioned. I don't... Carla's train of thought derailed when their fingers touched and a pop of static electricity zapped her. Smells of flowing water and wet stone hit her nose, out of place for any jetway. The corrugated walls rippled, making a sound like wind-blown grass. Sorry, you mentioned Italy earlier in the flight when I asked about your travel interests, remember? It's a good one. You can check it out at the library. Oh, right. Christ's sakes, Carla, let's go. Thank the lady, Mike said. Thank you, Rachel. I'll look into it next time I'm at the library. A feeling of subterfuge swept across her. International spies and forbidden meaning. It was a moment of unexpected joy, a bit of fun that she indulged in the moment. They drove home, with Mike leaning hard on the gas and cursing other drivers.
Thanks, Robin. That was awesome.
Cool.
It was great.
My pleasure.
So before we begin, and it's really to all the audience, the part that Robin read is really relevant to what's coming in the discussion. Robin and I had a little discussion on email about this as well, and yeah. So before we begin, I'll do a little explanation to give everyone here some context for the discussion that's coming. So pop culture has a long track record of using violence against women as fodder for entertainment and presenting aggressive and abusive behavior as normal, even desirable traits in men. From Peter Venkman, the serial harasser of women in Ghostbusters, to Christian Grey in 50 Shades of Grey, such masculine behavior is often portrayed as acceptable and part of the ideal man. As an integral part of pop culture, speculative fiction, including fantasy, science fiction, and horror, has its share of glorified misogynistic male figures held up as prime examples of masculinity, from alpha male leaders of werewolf packs to the seemingly irresistible appeal of male vampire protagonists. So nevertheless, there has been a growing number of speculative fiction stories which subvert and undercut the alpha male stereotype to expose exactly what they represent. Abusive men whose toxic behavior range from coercive control and gaslighting to physical violence against women and children. The counter movement has accelerated over the past half-decade since the advent of the Me Too movement that has galvanized increasing numbers of people to not just speak out against violence against women in real life, but to also publicly push back against pop culture that continues to put abusive men and abusive male behavior on the pedestal as heroes while normalizing the victim blaming of female survivors and victims. So with that in mind, today's panel will discuss how audiobooks can portray abusive men authentically and how this can help in efforts to galvanize the cultural changes needed to hold abusive men accountable and move conversations about toxic masculinity, victim blaming, and violence against women forward. So the Pixel Project created Giving the Devil His Due to harness the power of speculative fiction storytelling to counteract the toxic narratives about violence against women in pop culture that are driven by sexism, misogyny, and toxic masculinity. And each story in the book, including Errick's, confronts the issue of violence against women and invites readers to imagine a world where violent, misogynistic men get their comeuppance for abusing women and girls, Twilight Zone style. So, Errick, thank you for writing your original story, Devil's Hollow, for our charity anthology. What are your thoughts about having an audiobook edition of the anthology, including the powerful reading of your story by Robin?
I'm so excited to actually hear the story I wrote come to life in that way. It's not quite the same as anything. I mean, whenever anybody reads it, they're going to hear whatever their own imagination is going to bring to it. And if I read the story, it's just me reading it. I'm not actually a trained actor or I have all the vocal tics and weird mouth noises that all of us regular people have. So it's very satisfying to hear that done by a professional like Robin.
I'm glad.
Yeah. And Robin, thank you so much for donating your time and talent to recording 2 of our anthology stories for the audiobook. And by the way, our editor who can't be here today, Rebecca, she sends greetings as well and her thanks.
Oh, right.
Yeah, she's a big fan of yours, Robin.
Oh, that's so nice to hear. I'm glad.
Yeah.
I'm pleasing to the ear. I'm glad.
I hadn't realized that you'd read Kanisha's story too. I know Kanisha, and she's great. So
yeah, that was fun too. Very different tone, very different, feel of the story, but still got its point across.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the question for you, Robin, is as one of the best narrators in the audiobook business, why did you decide to join the cast of our anthology despite knowing that the issue of violence against women is a pretty difficult one? It's not popular. Many people find it too difficult to face, I think, in some ways.
I will say that somewhere in the past decade, I came across some stories, and I think it came actually really from the history of slavery. I've been doing a lot of books that deal with either nonfiction, what actually happened, or fictionalized stories. And so gender violence and racial violence have very similar roots because it's status and it's power over another group of people. And so there are a lot of similarities. And at some point, I think I had done a lot of them and some folks had heard them who were in casting. And then I started getting stories more about women. I did Roxane Gay's book. And I don't know if people know this. Roxane Gay, she's a wonderful writer and has great perspective on things. And we think of her as a nonfiction writer. She is also a fiction author. And she wrote a tremendous piece of work called An Untamed State about a woman who is kidnapped and she's raped when she's in their clutches. And the book, it doesn't focus on the violence as much as the aftermath and how one begins to heal from that and the type of support system that one would need to heal from that. But I realized while I was doing it that one of the things we don't do in popular entertainment is we don't show the after effect of what happens. Because it's entertainment, a violent thing happens and we walk away and we continue to follow the perpetrator. We don't actually turn our attention to the damage done and the person who's absorbed that damage. And so that's what Roxane did with her piece. And that's what a lot of the pieces I was doing. I think that was part of their focus, not to just follow a glorified male character that does this, but to actually deal with what's left in its wake and the coping mechanisms.
Yeah. And, it's something that a lot of, we've run the Read for Pixels program for almost 10 years now. And what you brought up, the point that you brought up about looking at the aftermath, the consequences, is something that authors talk a lot about when they talk about portraying violence against women in a way that is appropriate to the seriousness of the subject.
Mm-hmm.
Because once you, like what you said, Robin, once you just show the violence and then, in the next scene it's as if nothing happened, that trivializes everything.
Yes, I agree. It completely trivializes it. So in my performance, if it's not in the writing, I find a way to make sure I incorporate it into what I'm doing so that you can hear and you can begin to experience. If there's text there, I'm going to make sure that happens. Because I do have a little bit, I'm not the writer, and the writer is the man, so to speak. I mean, I believe in the primacy of the text. Whoever wrote that, that's their thing. And I don't mess with it because I'm not the writer. But I can elevate certain things when they happen to a character. I can shine a light on them. And so I do, or at least I try to.
Mm. So let's talk about audiobooks and their power to change the way stories portray abusive men and toxic masculine behavior in pop culture, and how that might help the wider fight to end violence against women. So how can speculative fiction audiobooks counteract stories and storytelling tropes in pop culture that normalize toxic masculinity and violence against women and glorify it as romance and entertainment for the masses? So I think we'll start with Robin because it picks up from what you were saying, I think.
Well, and you mentioned two really important words to me, which is speculative fiction, one of my favorite genres. And speculative fiction, I believe, has the power to, just as a genre in itself, to reimagine our future. This is what we're in. You can go back and reimagine the past and say, what if this was changed? And what would it look like if we carried that forward? Or we can say, this is where we are now. We'd like to be over here. And it helps us to imagine and almost like practice an alternate path to an alternate end that doesn't have to be what we are now. So for me, I find this genre potent. It's almost like disrupting the timeline. It's very Doctor Who. We can disrupt the timeline by imagining. And then once you can imagine a different future, you can put energy towards making it happen, manifesting it. That's how I feel about speculative fiction. I think it's so powerful.
Errick, what are your thoughts?
Well, I agree with that, definitely. And I think that what fiction of all sorts allows us to do is to engage subjects that are taboo or uncomfortable in a safe space. In terms of spreading a message, one of the things I was concerned about when I was writing this story is stirring up somebody's trauma. That's not the intent, because I do want the satisfaction of the story to be a pleasure. It could be a hidden pleasure. And I think these types of things would probably serve best in making either people who are aware of these behaviors but don't think about them, give them an opportunity to engage with something like that or recognize it in other people. And I would hope that eventually to also have the courage to confront it if possible. Whether it's a friend, a colleague, or something like, or even for themselves to recognize something and seek help for it, take some sort of action, I would hope. In terms of audiobooks, there's a lot of people that listen to audiobooks. That's how they read. Not only disabled folks, but there's a lot of people that just prefer it. So you're reaching a whole other audience with that as well, which I think is great.
Isn't oral storytelling like the oldest form of reading anyway?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It predates the printed word, right? It predates the printed word.
Right.
I mean, medically speaking, or biologically speaking, we are born able to process narrative storytelling, but orally, and we have no capacity to read. We have to actually build that area of the brain that allows us to read. We're not born with it. We actually have to build it. At least as I understand it, after going to a couple of lectures on neurology at my college reunion. But it is so primal, sitting around the campfire and telling a story. Every single culture on the planet that we know of has that. There's no culture that doesn't have a storytelling tradition and capacity. So we are going back to something that we're wired to understand, that has a primal, deep understand, like embedded archetypal almost function, I think. I feel very much like a Cro-Magnon or something on the end of the one. This is what I do for a living.
What that reminded me of is the Kwame Mbalia. He's written a series of books about Tristan Strong, and it sort of exists in the Black folklore, which was all oral tradition. And I'm aware of it, but he's familiar with it from his actual family members telling these stories, and now he's incorporated them into this mythology that he's built. And it was just a real hard reminder, because he includes a lot of details in there that I wasn't familiar with from the oral storytelling tradition. That it made me think, like, okay, so if this story gets handed down generation after generation after generation, each generation is not going to tell that story in exactly the same way, and it evolves with us, and new parts get added, and some parts are forgotten, and it lives on regardless, which is amazing.
This all reminds me of Aesop's fables, which are also told to get a point about ethics and morals across. And I'm just amazed at how, over thousands of years, the message never strayed, even though it was told orally. It never strayed. And then eventually, at some point, someone wrote it down and printed it and sold it, right? But the core of the message is still there. And which brings us to the next question, which is, how can the authentic portrayal of abusive male characters in audiobooks spark and move conversations forward about toxic masculinity, misogyny, and violence against women in constructive ways? Robin?
Well, I wrote a couple of notes down because I think there's two things. One is that we have this technology now that we didn't have before. Okay, we started around the fire, right? Around the fire on the beach, telling the story. And then we got the printed word. Technology came in. Bam, we have the Gutenberg, Bible being printed. We have stories now being printed, and people could privately consume their stories. But one of the interesting things with this technology now is that it can go either way. You can pop that CD, I say CD, right? They're also download now, into your car, and everybody can have the same storytelling experience while you're going somewhere, as long as it doesn't interrupt your driving. Or you've got this other thing. I just finished a book, and I was very insistent with the editor. I said, don't take out my breaths. I got very close to the mic, and I told the story as if I needed a confidant, which is what the experience is in the book. I needed a confidant, and you, my listener, are the one I'm confiding in. You're the only one who knows this. And it was the ability of the microphone to catch all the little sensitive things, any hitch in my breath, so that the emotional experience is brought right next to my listener. And I love that I have a big expensive mic that allows me to do that. And the technology is there to make it so intimate. And I think, like, if you're going to be telling if we're going to be telling stories about how men's behavior, we need to change this old paradigm, and we need to empower women to begin to make that change as well, and to change themselves. If we're telling a story literally right on someone's shoulder, right into their ear, it becomes a very intimate experience. And I think that's one way. When we make this storytelling more intimate, less presentational, we can be heard more deeply. That's my hope. It's my hope. I don't have any studies to prove it, but that's what it feels like.
Yeah. Errick? Oh dear, Errick is.
You're
Errick,
muted. You're muted,
you're
Errick.
muted. Oh dear.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. Errick, can you hear us?
I got it.
Okay,
Okay,
there you
I
go.
just had to
so
find where the
Errick,
button was. There's so many different streaming platforms. I was like, okay, where's this one at?
Yeah.
Anyway, yeah, my earbuds just ran out of juice. So, so just a comment on what Robin said. First of all, those, I think some people have difficulty seeing how storytelling or acting or things like that can be how they are art. Like, I think we tend to think of art as a visual medium necessarily, but like an artist really gives a damn about all these details that are going to go into the final product that I don't think consumers, all of us, I think, miss those details that the artist put the work into to make you experience the project even more. So, that was wonderful comment about, what goes into that. I think these things, stories about this type of thing, give people an opportunity to discuss a subject that they might not have had a way to engage it with other people. So kind of a device, like it just bringing up a subject raw can be extremely difficult. But if you start by like, oh, I read this, I heard this, I saw this article, and let me tell you about it, or have you seen it? You should read this and then we can talk about it, type of thing. So I think it gives people an opportunity to engage in conversations that might be a little too difficult to just hit head on. So that's where I think the value is in terms of your in response to your question, Regina.
yeah. So that links nicely to, the next question, which is basically, let's get down to the nuts and bolts of storytelling for audiobook narrators who, in the course of their work, like Robin mentioned earlier, may encounter stories about violence against women, including characters who are examples of abusive men that they have to read. So, Robin, from your perspective as an audiobook narrator, what are the particular challenges of narrating stories that feature violence against women?
Well, there's the personal one, which is it's just really difficult to put yourself in that journey, in that position, and experience it. The kind of work that I do, I can't really fake it. I got to go in it. And that's sometimes very hard. And when that happens, I take a step away, take a few breaths, take a break. I may have to come back at it. Or it'll make me furious. And I start dropping F-bombs and start ranting. But I think for me, one of the things that helps me, I feel like it's my community service, helping to reveal the intricacies of human relationships, like the stuff that you can't see. That's what theater is for. It makes things that are invisible visible. The unseen becomes seen in theater arts and playmaking. And I consider audiobooks part of that too, the larger beat. But Errick, you did something that was just so important, I think, in this. And that is, in your story, you keep giving us Carla, who's at the center, paired with this abusive male, but you added the perspective of Davy, who also disapproves of what's going on. And so we get to see the people who are seeing this situation and know that it's bad. She has allies, and those eyes are the eyes of those in the audience that know this is not right. But for somebody who's reading this who maybe isn't so savvy about that, and maybe just grew up with these patterns being so everyday that they've never questioned them, they get to see the other people in the story questioning them, judging that harshly, and finding it not to be right or correct or good. And I think for someone who's like any male that's grown up in a super, super masculine masculine value, aggressive home might not even know what the alternatives are. And isn't that why we're here, to help show them that there's another way? And so I found that to be like the most important part of the story, is that you put those people in there. And for me, I was like, oh, good. For me, I hold on to those too as a narrator. I know what I'm doing is I'm creating an experience, and I need both sides. And so it gives me the courage to go back into Carla and feel her pain.
Okay. I'm so glad you pulled that from there. When I came up with Mike, and when I wrote this story, I didn't want him to be what we would consider obviously abusive.
Right.
Like, with a sensationalized abusive man, when it's, I find that more often than not, it's someone who is grinding somebody down over a long period of time through lots of weird little behaviors, and that a lot of people can see it. And it's always kind of a crapshoot as to who will respond, who will jump in there and try to stop it, and who won't. And kids, kids grow up with this very odd kind of damage with it. So that's kind of what I was going for. Yeah. So
you nailed it. Nailed it.
You did what you did, Errick, is what those of us who work in the violence against anti-violence against women movement call red flags. So you planted a whole lot of red flags along the way, like breadcrumbs, especially in the first half of the book. And you also, what was interesting is that you included your son David at strategic points where we can see that he repudiates. He's not like his dad at all. He repudiates what his dad is about. He's not like that at all. It's lucky because many boys grow up in that sort of household, and what they do is they replicate that behavior. And that's how we get cycles of domestic violence that are so difficult to break, because they think it's normal. They think it's normal.
It's been normalized for them. And they know no other, if they know no other way. We have to give them the other way.
Yeah, to Robin's point, a lot of boys are growing up in an environment that, doesn't repudiate them. They're not questioning the water. They're not being shown other examples, especially if this is the kind of kid who never leaves a neighborhood, or never travels or meets people that are different or anything. So that's where really, you're really rolling the dice with somebody who does not experience the world, just takes what's been given to them. And and that's really hard. It's and I'm not speaking down on anybody who doesn't leave home, who stays in the same town. It's very difficult to know that you need to go out and experience other things, et cetera, et cetera. It can be very difficult, and hopefully those people meet that one person that gives them a little push in the right direction. And that's when their personality changes and they actually start to grow and be a different person instead of replicating the same thing.
Yeah, and even if they don't meet a person, we hope that they read a story, or they hear a news story, or I mean, the Pixel Project has received emails from parents and kids and all, and they watch these panel sessions, and then they go, "Wow, we didn't think about that." Or my son had an eye-opening listening session, watching his favorite YA author talk about all this, and he did not realize that all this is not good. So hopefully hopefully your story will make a difference. Someone out there is going to read your story, Errick, or listen to Robin read your story, and that it's gonna spark a light bulb. Suddenly there's going to be a ping. So Robin, your read of Errick's story brought home the spine-chilling everyday reality of women who are trapped in a marriage with an abusive man. And can you share some suggestions for audiobook narrators regarding the portrayal of abusive male characters authentically, and how do they do that without glorifying their violent and misogynistic behavior?
Well, I'm going to riff off of something Errick said, and you can't portray this male character as a cloak and dagger villain. It can't be a larger than life villain. They've got to be in the realm of reality. For instance, when someone comes out in a big red costume with a long red tail and horns, you're like, oh, that's the devil. We know who that is. We can't miss how we're supposed to feel about that character and who that character is. But the truth of the matter is, men are much more complex than that. There's a lot of good mixed in with this sometimes. And I would probably venture to say a lot of the time. And so the signals that one receives are mixed. There's the abusiveness on whatever level it's existing, with other things that now have to be wrestled with it as well. And so I would say when one is having to play that, you can't be the obvious bad guy, because life is so much more complex than that. And that's what women really have to deal with. The guy who beats them up at night and then the next morning comes in and brings coffee and tries to make him feel better. That doesn't make up for it. But the truth of the matter is those two sets of behaviors often exist in the same body, in the same person. And reading a story where you see that happen and realize this is not survivable, I need to get myself away from this, is the takeaway. That's what I think. I'm not sure if I'm being clear, but
yeah. So, we've in the course of the Pixel Project's work, we've come across so many studies that the UN has done, the World Bank has done, and all. And there was one news. I promise this is related to what we're going to talk about next. There was one longitudinal study, a massive one by the UN, I think, that said that 9 out of 10 people in the world don't believe women. An interesting point that was raised during our previous audiobook panel sessions is that society and culture still puts more weight on male voices. And you were mentioning something about this before we went on air, Robin, about how women in the past have had to get men to exert their agency in order to get things done. And so basically back to this is having a male narrator read out a story speech. So the topic we were discussing was whether or not having a male narrator read out stories featuring abusive male characters might be more effective at getting listeners to realize just how toxic such behavior is. So what are y'all's thoughts on this?
I actually thought about this a lot when you announced, Regina, when you told me that you're doing an audio book version of this, and I couldn't wrap my head around whether one or the other would be better. The more I think about it, I think there's the possibility that a male narrator might make, if it's a male abuser, a little more sympathetic than intended. Rather than playing it as straight as possible. Like that's the only thing I could think of with regard to that. I think ultimately though, if you have good talent, if you have good thoughtful talent, if you have an artist, they're going to work out all those details of how this should be played, et cetera, et cetera. You'll get a good product from it that way.
Yeah, I mean, we decided to go with a female narrator because, and Andy Paris will tell you, Robin, that we've had, Andy immediately put you forward, and we are like, yes. But both Andy and us were reading the stories and thinking, okay, so who's the protagonist here? From whose eyes are we looking? And then I think most of the story of Errick's story is from Carla's perspective. So we decided it is most appropriate to have a female narrator read the story. So anyway, so Robin, what are your thoughts on this? The whole male voice has more authority, sort of thing.
It's funny. I wrestle with that a lot. I just got a job. I've started I'm the female voice of the American Masters series, and as they were telling me, they've been doing this for 33 years. I think they said with a male, and no one ever thought that a woman could be an announcer. There's no narrator because it's all interviews in American Masters, but I was contacted by a radio station. Same thing. They were like, "We've had a male station voice forever." And some of the women at the station were like, "Well, why? Is there a reason why? Why, the person died, we have to replace them. Does it have to be another man?" And I think that habit and that perception of male voices as being more authoritative, it comes into it. Although I know a lot of women with some pretty authoritative voices. So I'm not sure that that's necessarily going to continue. Maybe we'll be able to dispel it. But I think it's point of view, and as you were saying, whose voice is in it. If you have a woman narrating Carla's journey, you give to your female readers a flashlight, someone who's sort of guiding the way to empowerment. It's for their benefit. If you have a story, I think, where you have males going through some sort of arc of change, then it almost seems like it's there to shine a light on those behaviors for other men. And once you figure out where that point of focus is, then it would, to me, be a whole lot easier to choose whether you have a male or a female. But just in the wild, choose a male, choose a female. I don't know if I would want to read that story and see this is a story for women to learn from, to be empowered by. I'm not sure if it's one that would be as much of a lesson for men, except, have somebody taste your bourbon before you drink it. That's the warning for the guys. But a different story, a different story might have a different moral. And I would probably go with that.
The interesting thing is that, we have 16 stories in the anthology. Only 2 are read by men.
Okay.
And it was a very interesting exercise, working with Andy Paris on the casting, because like I said, we had to look at, who the protagonist is, with the perspective that the story is told from. And 14 out of 16 are from the woman's perspective.
Point of view. Yeah. Because we need to survive it. I get it. I do.
Yeah. You would be amused in a morbid sort of way. Robin, we had a review of the book on Amazon, and basically Errick knows this, I think. A woman saying, "Thank you for the book. It was so cathartic. Now I don't need to go kill my brother-in-law because,
Well, yeah, there are some nice revenge fantasies, and that serves a purpose. It helps. This character did had her revenge, and I'm going to live vicariously through that. Therefore, I do not need to pick up that knife and do that myself. I think that's a very valid point to have that included in here, because you take that kind of behavior for quite a long time, and at some point you may find yourself going towards violence, as a reaction, as a counter move, as a defense, purely as a defense. I did another book, and it's fiction, and it's a fantasy, and it's fiction. But the very first scene is the woman coming home, and she's got a bag of groceries, and he just wails on her, and she's on the floor, and something from within her wells up. She usually just takes it, and her hand is sprawled out, and the groceries are there. She picks up the can of ketchup, and she just goes, "Wah!" And he's shocked that she fights back.
Yeah. And, just a quick mention that, there are a lot of women in jail now, in prison now, for defending themselves against abusers. And there's a movement now of lawyers doing cases pro bono, where they're trying to get laws changed or set a precedent, that, women are not jailed for defending themselves against
Right.
their abusive men. And in Afghanistan, apparently, is it Afghanistan? I think so. There was a report in the New York Times about how women in Afghanistan fight back against their abusers, so that they go to prison, so that they no longer have to endure the
Oh my God.
battery from him. They have some peace and quiet for once,
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean and then it's we hear so many cases, and it's just something wrong with the justice system, the legal system, that this all has to happen, and not just in one country,
No,
in
it's
so
all
many
over.
countries.
Yeah.
And so that brings us to the final leg of our discussion. So storytelling via different formats and channels is a major tool used by women's human rights defenders to help push for cultural change. So in some ways, today's audiobooks can be said to be oral storytelling for the digital age. The difference is that instead of telling stories to a small group of listeners who are physically in front of them, audiobook narrators bring stories from print to life through their voices to produce recordings for the global audience. So how can today's audiobook narrators, some of whom have huge and devoted fan bases, help advance efforts to address and end violence against women? So I think this question is more for Robin.
Wow, that's a hard question. I think it requires playing your characters very truthfully, not shying away from playing like a full version of the characters. And I think I said this really before, not to play a caricature, because that lessens, I think, the impact. To do things like read a story for the Pixel Project, that can help. I like that. I also think it's our duty to flag. I say that flag. Bring to the attention of, let's say, a publisher. And this happened with me this year. I was doing a romance story, and it's a very, very long romance story. But in the first 25% of the book, it turned into a rape fantasy, and she falls in love with her rapist, and I was like, okay, you guys, you need a trigger warning on this book, because I would be really upset if I started reading this and ran into this after I started investing in the characters. When we see these old, outdated modes of behavior that are just sort of, oh yeah, that's just the way things were. That's one of the phrases I absolutely abhor. That's just the way things were. I hear that constantly about the way people of color have been treated since forever. And any time period where that was the case, I hear, oh, well, that's just the way things were. Yes, but that doesn't make it right. And it doesn't make and that doesn't mean we should condone it. It doesn't mean we shouldn't face it and critique it for what it was, and make sure it doesn't continue into the future. Because, as I said, when we started, that same impulse to dominate women is the same impulse to mistreat children and to also have power over people of color. And it's very bell Hooksian, if you've read any bell hooks.
Bell Hooks is awesome. She actually deconstructs everything, and we sometimes share relevant quotes from bell Hooks on our Facebook page.
Yes.
And because she always says stuff that makes you stop and think, wait a minute.
Yep.
Wait a minute. We're all soaking in patriarchy, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And reading bell Hooks is like having the lights turned on.
Yes. Feminism is. I give people copies of Feminism is for Everybody, and I narrated that book as well. I give people copies of it.
Yeah. And the saddest thing is we have to keep saying the same thing over and over and over again.
Yeah.
And every generation, we have to keep saying the same thing to get it through to people. And I'm now thinking of that in relation to what you said about your aunt. See your aunt and how old habits die hard.
Yes. Think about all the women out there who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, who grew up with this is just a regular, this is de rigueur, it's the way it is, who are doing that old, I'm not the one with the power, he's the one with the power, but I'm going to attach myself to the one with the power and ride that. And then I'll have power over other people because I'm associated to him. Isn't that why we got Trump in 2016? I think if we analyze the voting patterns.
Because white women voted for him. I'm going to be very frank now that, I've been listening on the ground to everyone, including including a lot of Black feminist womanists. And because of, we all work in interlocking spaces. I'm listening to everyone. And when you look at the patterns, they're just stating the truth. So it's, everything's intersectional. You can't,
right.
Yeah, you can't critique something without bringing all the other factors into it.
Right.
And, I was just going to ask both of you, do you have any suggestions about how anti-violence against women activists and organizations can use audiobooks to support or be part of the advocacy and activism for justice for women and girls? Because I might be wrong, but we appear to be the first anti-violence against women organization who's actually actively put together an anthology specifically addressing all the issues, and then going on to make an audiobook about it. So I was curious to see what both of you have to say about, what advice would you give to anti-violence against women activists and organizations who might not see audiobooks as an advocacy tool.
Wow. This is how I see it. When you're listening to an audiobook, most of the time now, we get them as digital downloads. They come right into our computer or they come right into our phone, and you can listen to them. And the situation that I think of in this context of what you're talking about is, how do we forward the anti-violence against women movement? I mean, think about those men who are controlling, who control what the women in their lives consume, what they're able to read, when they're able to go, what they're able to spend. How do you reach women who have been essentially put into a bubble? I think audiobooks are great for that, because if you have a phone and you download it into an account on your phone, you don't have a book you have to hide in your house because the title gives away that you're reading something about feminism. It's a very private experience too. You put the earbuds in, nobody hears what you're hearing. I would imagine that could be helpful in terms of disseminating information to women whose freedom is being controlled or curtailed.
Yeah. Errick, any thoughts?
The first thing I thought of with that question is anybody who's dismissive of audiobooks is being dismissive of a segment of the population that is often dismissed. Everybody significantly disabled, literally can't see, to people with cognitive issues, disabilities, and it's just easier to listen to audio. And plus, in this modern world, I think that these types of digital things distributed through library systems are really great. Like, libraries turn up in my stories a lot because nobody's I'm not going to say nobody's paying attention to libraries, but it's a great place to go and absorb things without leaving tracks, right? You're not doing it from home. You go to or you pop into a library, you can kind of get any kind of information you want, even digital stuff nowadays. So that's being aware of the further reach of digital information is, I think, just very helpful.
Yeah. And when we conceived of the anthology, we think of it as a Trojan horse, because at the back we've tucked in 2 pages worth of links to helplines in 205 countries. And we thought, nobody's gonna, if someone's in a home with an abuser, he's just gonna look at our cherry. It's true. I actually said this to Linda D. Addison, Errick. I said, wow, because the Horror Writers of Association has a book recommendation list. So Linda very kindly helped put us in touch with the Horror Writers Association, and they put our book up. And then we thought, wow, this looks downright cheerful, with the purple and gold or purple and white compared to other horror themed books. And anyone looking at the way it's designed, they wouldn't think that it's some revolutionary book, right? They'll just think, she's just reading one of those trash story things, because the style is also very similar to some romance books. We've seen some contemporary romance books. There's a particular style that's all illustration, and it's very bright and cheerful. So we thought that this is a Trojan horse of sorts. Someone can buy and give it to someone as a birthday present. Someone can tuck it into someone's bag. Someone can bring it to book club and read about it, talk about it. And then right at the end, they'll get the help. They'll get the information that will get them to the help that they need. And feeling that they have our website there as well, they can visit us and get the help that they need. So audiobooks, like Robin says, adds an extra dimension to it, because nobody can see what you're reading, because there's nothing to see.
Sure.
You're just listening to it in your headset, right?
Yeah.
My initial impression of the cover was sort of somewhere in the realm of what you're saying, and the more I thought about it, like I didn't realize that Linda had got you in touch with the Horror Network, because this is 100% a work of horror.
Yeah.
And the cover's kind of charming, and that is an aspect of the story that I wrote, and I feel like a lot of abusers, a lot of abusive people, period. That's one of their secret weapons. Speaking of Trojan horses, you come in and very charming, and they have ways of getting people on their side, and no one believes their victims when they say it. So I think it's actually very appropriate when you think about it.
We call it the bait and switch. Seriously, those of us who work in domestic violence, dating violence and stuff, we call it the bait and switch, the Jekyll and Hyde, the love bombing at the beginning. And then once he's got you're married, that's when it all starts. In earnest. I mean, there are red flags before that. So one of the things that we do is we teach people about red flags. What's red flag behavior that indicates that he's controlling, that he will isolate you, that he will not, that he doesn't see you, he sees you as lesser than him. So that's why Errick's story and many of the stories in the book are important, because the authors all lay out, show what red flags look like. So final question of the day, and it's no question for the audience. They're all listening very intently, I think, and they're having a chat and one of those having a chat with Juliana in the comments box. But the final question of the day is, what speculative fiction audiobooks would you recommend to audiobook fans who are looking for titles where the narrator handles a portrayal of abusive men and stories about violence against women well? Let's start with Robin, since Robin's had loads.
Well, this particular anthology is very well targeted. You had a goal going into it. I'm not sure that some of the books that I've done had that as a goal, but An Untamed State by Roxane Gay is one I would take a look at. Now, again, this is a fiction story. Another one, it's Someone Like Me, and it's very much fantasy in the sense that, or not speculative fiction. What would it be called? I guess I'm not even sure what genre would fit in, but Someone Like Me, it does. It was that book. It starts out with a woman coming back to her abusive husband, and it's almost like an alter ego of herself. And I can't say any more because that'll be a spoiler. I can't talk about it.
Who's the author of the book?
I'm going to forget his name, but it's Someone Like Me. If you Google it, you'll find it. I'm at about 500 plus audiobooks now. So when it comes to me remembering titles and authors together, I'm terrible. But those are the first two that come to mind. And I would have to think, I guess, a little bit more. But An Untamed State, especially, it talks about family and the healing from abuse. Now, it's not an abusive relationship. We're talking about a rape situation, but it's still the journey that a woman goes through in the aftermath back to healing or some sort of wholeness, which I found had a lot of value.
Errick? Sorry, Robin.
Oh, no, it's okay.
I'm trying to see if there's an audiobook version of this, and I think there is. But the book that came to mind for me was Cold Sweat, My Father, James Brown and Me by Yama Brown, because it's, she's speaking about this from the perspective of a victim. She grew up with the kind of violence that James Brown could bring into things, and he was a very popular, powerful man. And for what he did to her mother, how it changed her behavior for the worse, because she started somehow dating abusive men. But yeah, that would be the book that I would recommend to delve into that subject.
I would almost say I did a book recently, and I didn't realize the connection until I was just sitting here at the moment. But the character in the book, the main character, is about 85, and she's in an assisted living facility, but a very small one. And as an extension, we do find elder abuse in that same way of power over a population of people who are contained in a place. They don't have the freedom to go. They need supportive care, but that dependency can easily lead to abuse. And so again, like with bell hooks, I do think that is it's another form of that kind of abuse and power. And there are little hints of that in there. Now, I don't want to say anything else because I can't stand giving spoilers on a book or a movie. But Ian Reid is a Canadian author, and his book, I think it's his third book now, it's called We Spread. And I did the audiobook of it. And again, it's the same kind of power dynamic. And it's subtle. The power moves are subtle, but you see how devastating they are.
So we've come to the end of the panel session, and so I'm going to put 2 slides up to tell everyone where to go get the audiobook and where to go get the paperback or ebook. So here we go. I hope this works. All right, can you see this? Can everyone see this?
Yeah.
I can see it.
Okay, so before we wrap up, just a quick reminder that those of you who are interested in getting your very own copy of Giving the Devil His Due, you can order the audiobook, the ebook, or the paperback edition from major booksellers worldwide, including Amazon, Kobo, Google Play, Apple, and more. And I'm going to, okay. Nice. So And all the proceeds will go towards keeping the Pixel Project's campaigns, programs, and initiatives such as this one alive and kicking. And additionally, we have teamed up with 12 of the 16 authors who contributed stories, including Errick, to offer a special anthology book plate for buyers. Each author has 16 book plates that they will sign. Each if you send in the proof of purchase, you get one, and it's first come first served. And each book plate includes a resource for domestic violence and sexual assault victims and survivors in 205 countries. And for more information about the anthology and how to score one of these exclusive book plates, visit http://bit.ly/giving the devil his due. This is case sensitive, everyone. So make sure that you capitalize the letters where they need to be capitalized.
Uh-oh. We made it all the way to the end. That was great. Wow. I hope I'm just reading some of the notes in the comments. I'm glad that this was enjoyable.
Okay, I hadn't flipped over to that. I just had private chat on and just didn't see any of this.
Yeah, I didn't see any. That was all stuff.
I hope Juliana can save everything since Regina just got canceled.
Yeah. Really pleased though. It was an honor to work on your piece, Errick. Really
Thank you.
great. You made my work. You made my job easy.
That's good to know. I'm glad I'm getting it right once in a while.
No, absolutely.
Yeah,
I used to teach English as a second language, and one of the things I noticed. Yay! Here we go. Hi. So teach English as a second language, and one of the things I noticed. Yay! Here we go.
Hi. Sorry, hang on a second. I've got the other window open too. So let me just log off from YouTube.
Here we go.
There. I was on. I could hear myself on both screens. So yeah, Regina unfortunately lost power. She's having trouble with electrical issues in her house. So, but we made it to the very end of it. So that was fantastic. And thank you both for coming. Thank you both. That was a wonderful, wonderful discussion. Do either of you have any announcements to make? Anything you'd like to share? Any upcoming projects you want to announce?
Oh, I think I just blabbed on about everything. I'm trying not to give spoilers, but
you dropped a few on the way in, yeah.
Yeah. I just finished, and it doesn't have a tie-in particularly with this, but N.K. Jemisin wrote 2 books, and see, now I have to come up with titles. It's this late at night. I've just done The World We Became, and it's the second book in a series, and so that's coming out. And I have an interview in the New Yorker magazine coming out this month, so I can't wait to read it. I have no idea what it'll say.
Fantastic.
That's cool. I have a couple. The only thing I can talk about is a couple of short stories that I have coming in anthologies. One is called Folkloric, and kind of like this anthology, it's I was asked to write something for it, but it's something I don't normally write. But it's all weird fiction, and it's set in the 19th century and prior. So there's 2 things that I don't normally do. So I wrote a story about Robert Smalls that included a lot of weird elements to it. And Blackened Roots is an anthology about the Walking Dead, told exclusively by people of color. It's currently still raising funds in Kickstarter. So if anybody's interested in supporting that, please take a look for Blackened Roots. I hope it gets funded because it looks like it's going to be a very cool anthology.
Neat. Cool.
And I wrote a story in that about a guy who's finding what seemed to be living body parts in the subway.
Oh, well, then we definitely have sort of a tie-in. Mine is The City We Became is the first book, which you might want to read first. And then The World We Make. Those are the 2 titles. but very much about New York City and how we hang together, and we're stronger together as opposed to when we get in conflict with each other.
Mm-hmm.
We can save each other if we realize that we're supposed to be a team.
I wasn't aware that book had a sequel, so thanks for
It just came out. So
wonderful. Well, thanks for sharing that with us, and thank you both for being here, and thank you to everyone who's watching. And have a good day or a good evening to everyone wherever you are.
No, thanks for having me.
Thank you.